Welcome to the Oxa podcast, where we discuss science-based breathing tools and practices to optimize your health. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Matthew Chafford, biomedical engineer and health tech podcaster. Our guest today is Ryan Carroll, who is a certified breathwork instructor, nutrition coach, and personal trainer. Ryan has worked with hundreds of people over the last 20 years, developing programs to control anxiety, regulate the nervous system, and breathe more efficiently. In today's conversation, Ryan explains the importance and ways of retraining and assessing breathing mechanics as a first step for breathwork to address anxiety. He also tackles misconceptions about intense breathwork methods and shares why he advocates for a holistic approach that includes mindset and lifestyle changes to obtain the best results. We talk about breathwork techniques, integrating formal and informal breathwork practices, and ways to address negative self-talk with upgraded affirmations. By the end of this episode, you will know how breathwork can fit into a holistic approach to managing anxiety and finding inner peace. Before we jump right in, I'd like to add that this podcast is brought to you by Oxa, the first breathing wearable with live biofeedback and your coach for enhanced sleep and stress relief. Oxa measures in real time your vitals, like your heart rates or your respiratory rates, and creates personalized exercises for you to control stress and get better sleep. Head over to oxalife.com for more details on how Oxa can help you live a healthier life. And now, here's our conversation with Ryan Carroll. So how do you define anxiety, Ryan, and what characterizes anxiety disorder?
Anxiety is an interesting topic in terms of, every single person, it seems like, has some experience with anxiety. It is not the bad guy that we make it out to be. Anxiety is kind of built into us as a protective mechanism that's kept us safe and helped us survive. But in the modern world, that innate built-in mechanism is kind of off the chain. It's just no control, and we're kind of always heightened. And that mechanism is actually we make it into the bad guy, but it's actually the environment we live, which is really kind of making it chronic. So chronic anxiety flat out is our fault. It's like we've built this modern world to kind of help life be easier, but in some aspects it's at our detriment. Anxiety, the definition of anxiety is basically just worry, fear about something that is innately, like I said, is a protective piece. So but now in our chronic realm, it's just, the world we live in is kind of just pushing us into that state. So let me kind of pull back a little bit and go back to kind of what I was saying, like our ancestors. So we look at ancestrally, like where we came from. So when we were in an environment that is natural, we needed those heightened states to be able to pick off, changes in barometric pressure, changes, rustling of the leaves, or to see a storm coming in, or if there was a predator or prey that we had to go after. So our nervous system could be alerted, and then we could be enhanced to go towards or away or freeze or whatever we needed to do. Now, take that same biology and bring it into a modern world where everything is trying to get our attention. Whether it's the news or social media, or alerts on our phone, or it's people everywhere. It's walking in urban environments where there's cars going around. It's just we have that heightened state built in that normally would go like this. It would help us out, and then we would come back to a state after we responded to it, and we'd come back quickly. Animals in wild today are still kind of do that. So if you look at, a predator-prey situation where a lion is chasing a gazelle. The lion chases that gazelle. They're both heightened. Both nervous systems are heightened because one is going after the other one is trying to escape. And after that's done, whether or not the lion got him or not, they both go back, or at least one of them will go back. But if say the gazelle got away, they both go back. Their nervous system comes back down. They'll shake it off. And they'll go and they're drinking their water. Humans, on the other hand, we have so many resources to keep that anxiety going. So that we have something happen to us, whether it's us getting cut off in traffic or someone calls us a bad name. Now we have this resource of social media. We have each other, and we are just perpetuating that victim mindset, that story that we created. And now that little piece that should have just been a small part of our day has enveloped our entire day. Going back home to our partners, telling about how we got cut off in traffic and someone flicked us off,
So it's like we don't have these resting moments after the event that enables you to kind of recover from it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's in my eyes, the modern world is kind of like what is responsible for all of our chronic anxiety. Obviously, there's different aspects that impact it, down to what you eat, who you surround yourself with, and your other lifestyle habits. If you see the sun, or if you're socially isolated, all those things have a big impact. But those are all part of a modern world. All those things we are pulling away from our ancestral roots. When we have a stressful event, we don't have that. We have the time. We don't choose to take the time to stop because we're not mindful.
Yeah, it's an important distinction.
Yeah. Presence and mindfulness is ultimately the goal of what we're looking for in anxiety, but we just don't have the ability to get there because of the environment we've created. And now I don't hate like modern technology in the world and science and medicine, things that have helped us survive. But typically what we do nowadays is we find something that helps humanity survive, like agriculture, technology. And then instead of just using it as a tool, now we rely on it and we forget everything else, our roots. So
yeah. We talked in the first episode about stress management with Dave Wood, that you might know, who's working in New Zealand. How do we distinguish, or can we actually distinguish the anxiety part from like the stress part? Is it both? Like, I guess it's interlinked to some ways. So what's your view on that?
I mean, if we're talking like chronic, stress and anxiety, it's like a stress response faced with how you process it emotionally is basically what we're looking at. And that's why the breath is such a huge piece in this, is it's so powerful. It's not the only piece of it. Like sometimes, breath can get you back there, but then if everything else is dysregulated, you're going to come right back. So that's why people typically get hooked on certain things. Like, why isn't the breath work? It only works for a few minutes. It goes back. Well, your breath isn't the only answer. So certain things in life you need to do. You need to get sun. You need to have a community. You need to be sleeping properly. You have to eat right. There's a lot of things that are just your basis, that you need to establish. And then when you add the breath to that, the power is like, holy shit, what just happened? Between those things, like stress is great. Again, it's just how much and the body doesn't really understand the differences, So the other issue is, you have people they go to a stressful environment, they're in a bad relationship, they're sleeping terribly, they're eating poor, and then they go do CrossFit at 7:00 at night and they're just destroying themselves. So it's just stress on stress on stress. There's no recovery. So that's, to me, the difference on those. And then anxiety built into that would just be kind of how you emotionally are relating those things.
And so could you give us an example of how, what's the concrete impact of like when you go through an anxiety event where you have some part of the response similar to what you have when there's an acute stress event? What's the direct impact on, our breathing pattern? How does it interfere with our breathing in general?
So if we look at anxiety, what's happening is, again, that innate protective piece that is built in. What it's going to do to us when something happens, when something is threatening, is it's going to put us into a sympathetic state, which is going to increase our heart rate, which is going to in turn have on off gas of CO2. So CO2 will be more present, and that's going to cause us to breathe faster. And in normal states, that's fine. We breathe faster, we utilize it, and then we go back to our normal ways. But when we are dysregulated, and that is constant, now we're creating chemistry changes. So we got respiratory alkalosis, which is going to, give us those even more feelings of discomfort, which is like the tingling, the disassociation, all that stuff that's associated with anxiety. And then now we're becoming less tolerant to CO2. So the more CO2 that even at the smaller amounts that we get, it's going to activate all these responses, and it's going to make our ability to deal with stress so much harder.
And so can you explain us, I think you work with a lot of different clients that come to you with that sort of issue, anxiety-related disorders. Can you explain us how what's your process when someone comes to you, in terms of, I'm not going to say like to diagnose the conditions, I think it's not really the point, but how do you accompany them into the journey saying, okay, well, maybe there's something we can do with breathwork there. How do you, what are the techniques that work? How can you alleviate some of those symptoms? How do you define among all the techniques that might actually work, which one is the most relevant one for an individual? Could you explain us a bit what's your approach?
Again, I harp on the ancestral approach. It's what I believe in. I believe if we can get back to our base roots, then coming out of that, we can kind of figure out the little pieces that we want to add in that are individualized. But as humans in our biology, the ancestral roots that I use are sleep, it's movement, and movement doesn't have to be training or anything specific. Movement can be getting steps in, it can be stretching, it can be, I love strength training and I love all aspects of it, but it's just also, it has to be something that you enjoy. So movement is a huge piece, obviously. And then also where we store a lot of emotion and stress is in the physical body within the fascia. So that's going to be a big key, is getting movement involved. And then I said sun, grounding, I feel is a very, I know it's a woo-woo topic, but it is based on a lot of good science. So getting your bare feet, body on the earth and being in nature just has a seriously significant impact on your mindset and your mood. And then we look at diet. I won't go too deep into that, but that's a big focus is the diet. Basically nothing radical, but like taking out a few things and adding back in a few things that are really have a strong impact with nervous system forward. And then community is another one, with inflammation and stress and fatigue and depression. Community has a huge impact on that. And then the breath is the strongest tool, I think. Like adding in as your base is established, the breath and how you use it is going to be a huge impact. And then that kind of goes into what kind of breath do I do? What do I do? So we got to understand a lot of different pieces of that. Like, when people hear breath work nowadays, it means you're most likely hyperventilating until you like feel high and then you feel cool. And then you come out of that and now your nervous system's all ramped up and you feel crazy again. So it's not for everybody. Yeah, I think it's a beautiful practice, the holotropic, the conscious connected style of breathing. I think it can be placed in a program very effectively and it's profound. But if you're going there just immediately, it's probably not the right path, especially in terms of anxiety. I think what's smart to do if you have anxiety in terms of breath work is to assess your breathing mechanics, is to understand your tolerance to CO2 and your relationship to air hunger, to look at your breath rate, to look at your breath capacity, to look at your HRV. And all of these things, OXA is just an amazing tool for. Like there's no other device that I've found that actually measures breath capacity and breath rate effectively. Because you can look at your breathing rate and how many breaths you take, but the second you consciously observe that, you change it completely, whether it's slower or faster or whatever, shallower or deeper. Those are kind of the basis of what I would say. I start with assessment of your breath, your chemistry a little bit, your tolerance, and then also establishing at the same time your ancestral roots, your base, so that you're enhanced enough and you're strong enough to be able to have these changes and have the breath truly impact you long term instead of everything else is screwed up. And now I just add breath in every once in a while and immediately goes back to the same. So those bases aren't established and the breath doesn't do as much as we want it to.
And in terms of the assessments that we discussed in episode 2 with Brian McKenzie, he was giving one example of one assessment he was doing. I think he was saying, you take a full breath in, you take it I don't remember if he said you take a full breath in, you release it, or you just skip it. And then you go up as many stairs as you can. And if you can go more than 40 stairs, it's pretty good. If it's below, that's kind of one way to mark it. Do you have something similar you would, actually do with some of your clients to measure that in a practical way without, going with the whole, I assume the approach is not to go with a super sophisticated setup where you measure, with I don't know what's the name in English, but this device that actually measures, the composition of the gases and
VO2
the breathing
max
volumes.
Testing
Exactly.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, not necessarily. I mean, there's stuff you can play with. There's a lot of toys out there that you can use, but you just don't need it. Things you can do are visual assessments. You can look at your breathing mechanics. So, are you a vertical or horizontal breather? Are you combo breather? Where do you breathe? That's mechanics. And then how does it feel when you do certain in range? Your inspiratory reserve volume versus your expiratory reserve volume. It's on those ranges. What does it feel like in the body? And then you can also measure it with tape, with garment tape, your capacity. So that's a pretty easy way to understand your actual breathing capacity, how much air you can get in. And it's also great just simply, measuring right around the sternum, straight around, how big you can go, and then kind of trying to increase that with different practices. A lot of freediving techniques like air packing and those kind of things with movement, I use a lot to increase capacity, because if you can increase that, then obviously you can breathe more and breathe deeper and get a full breath. The actual test, kind of similar to what Brian was doing in his, is I run a few. So I'll do an inhale retention, just a max hold, and it's a freediving method that I use. Basically. It's 2-minute breathe up, and then it's 100% out, and then 100% in, and then you retain for as long as you can. I similarly will do the challenge I did with you guys today was that exhale max test. It's a great test. See how long, it's kind of a combo of CO2 tolerance and breathing mechanics. So the ability to control your breath. So as you exhale, you're going as long as you possibly can, and then at the end of it, when you stop, you ask yourself, did I stop because of air hunger, or did I stop because I ran out of breath? So if you can control the breath, that means you have really good breath control, and I would prefer to have a stop from air hunger. So that's another one. And then I also like to do them active. So I do an active step. So inhale and exhale So a suspension and a retention. We'll do both. And we'll do just walking. How many steps can you get of both? I personally I created a breath efficiency tracker. So, there's like your daily, your weekly, and your monthly tests that you run on your own, and you fill it in. And it's just great to see metrics because, when you look at metrics changing and you feel the anxiety kind of in the control of stress happening, that's a lot more powerful because a lot of people need, especially men, it seems, we need those like hard numbers of like, I'm improving there. And that's why I feel this way,
Yeah. No, I see. It makes sense. So in terms of that's the assessment part. And when it comes to, acting upon how we can manage chronic anxiety with breath work, or how we can manage certain acute events of anxiety with breath work, what are some of the methods that you've, that you employed, that you've experienced for those listeners that are, concerned with those particular issues?
To me, so formal, informal practices, so informal practice is obviously just breathing, practicing formal techniques daily to improve your informal practice and your relationship to stress. That's my preferred route. Acutely addressing with breath is fine. But to me, once you get that formal practice and then you are just breathing better normally, informally, then all you have to do is become aware of your breath. If you're feeling anxiety, you're like, all right, tap into it. Just I can already tell. I'm just like already started shallow breathing. And then all you have to do is just kind of redirect it into a full breath. I don't really say like, all right, let's do box breathing. Let's do 4-7-8. Those are great. You can do those if those work for you. But it's just all those breath patterns and different techniques are just breathing consciously. So to me, I think practicing, becoming better at, retraining your breath to how you naturally should, breathing through the nose majority of the time, practicing some CO2 tolerance techniques regularly, having a decent breath hold, all those things are going to help. So when you go to have an issue, you can acutely just become aware of your breath and it's going to downregulate. That's what I use.
Are there certain like misconceptions or challenges that, when you have people that come to you to address those problems that you've seen in terms of, okay, well, they thought they should have breath this way, or they came up with some suggestions of tools, and then you just realize, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Are there like, certain misconceptions or issues that you've seen?
Of course. Yeah. That's, I would say Wim Hof is like it's the famous one. I love Wim, and I respect him for bringing attention to breath and all this stuff and cold plunging. And I think he's great, but it's not for everybody. It's a pretty intense, over breathing technique where you can hold your breath a long time because you have no CO2. I mean, it's effective at making you feel good. And I also think that's more acute. I think that's more long-term. For some people, it's great. I think it's a great technique for a lot of people. Not so much daily. I don't believe in it, at least. I think that, and then the conscious connected hyperventilation, like holotropic, let's get high type of breath. Obviously, I'm simplifying it, but it's become that. So it's the same thing with a lot of things. Like we go to plant medicine, or we go to anything else that kind of like it helped us through a period, but also kind of like exploring and getting a little bit high. That's okay, but to do that daily is ineffective. So I think understanding with the assessment where you're at first, building that base, building your informal practice so that when you breathe it, your formal practice so that your informal is substantial and that your chemistry is easily changed and won't be affected as much, then you can start to explore those realms. But I think that's kind of the biggest thing now is people are like, yeah, I did breath work and I felt worse, so it's because they're tapping into, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. No, and I understand. And can you share with us, any like sort of like success stories or examples of clients you've had who were dealing with severe anxiety or chronic anxiety that, you got to work with and at some point got, improvements? Like what's the duration before, people see improvements? How long, do you accompany them? And what's been your experience with that?
I mean, this sounds like it's, kind of maybe arrogant, but it's true. It's just like I've never not had a substantial success story in terms of people with anxiety and helping them grow through that. Because again, going back to like having a system where it's not, the breath is the major tool of what I use, but also that base is so effective. And going back to the ancestral roots, where then we apply the breath and the mindset techniques, and we really help to integrate it as well, like in a full system. I typically do a 12-week program with my one-on-one clients. I also have a program that is just a course that they can run on their own. When it comes to this stuff, most people, like there's no, like the way I would run it is that there is no style of breath in the beginning or anything that we're adding into their life that would cause an increase in anxiety. When they start to embed these things, this depends on the person. So if someone is mostly healthy, they move, they exercise, they eat pretty well, they have a good support system, but they are inside a lot and they drink a lot and get bad sleep. So I'm like, all right, so those things you kind of have solid. Let's get your sleep up. Here's some techniques for that. Let's get your drinking pulled back a little bit, and let's get you out in the sun a little bit. And so we do that, and I'm like, all right, and then these are the 3 breath practices we're going to use. You're going to do this one every day. You're going to do this one every other day, and this one every other day, or something like that. It's not groundbreaking. Like nothing I do is crazy. It's just like it's mindfulness and it's health, but it's just from more of a rooted standpoint.
Exactly. In some ways, it's kind of like, going back to common sense things and going away from all that. Yeah, the modern world that you said and all the problems it brings, although it also helps a lot for a lot of things. I had another question. I have close people around me who do have, anxiety, and thing that comes quite often up as a symptom or in those anxiety events is that they tell me, well, you have some kind of like an inner voice, that is quite destructive, that is quite negative. Is this something that, we've seen with some of your clients where you try to address that as well through breath work or through the holistic approach you've described? Is this something you can elaborate on?
Yeah, that voice is tough, man. It says stuff, you say stuff to yourself that you wouldn't say to like your best friend, So it's pretty awful. But so affirmations are obviously like, everybody knows what an affirmation is, positive, present, obtainable, words that you're saying to yourself. But what happens, I think a lot of times in that space is we say something to ourselves so many times that it just becomes subconscious. We don't even pay attention to it anymore. We're not actually ingraining it. So like, all right, yeah, I'm strong and I'm worthy and I attract money. You say it every day until it's just like not there. You could put it on your phone in the background. You don't even look at it anymore. So what I really enjoy I call them upgraded affirmations. Basically a rolling conversation with your subconscious. So, you'll say an affirmation and you'll listen for a response from the subconscious. So I'll say, I'm worthy of love and I attract money. And then, your subconscious is like, no, you actually aren't. You suck and you'll never get money. And, it just goes spirals up. You're listening. You're like, okay, I see that response. And then you respond, you make another affirmation. Writing this is really powerful too. You write, so if it's like, no, it's scary. Your response is like, I'm scary. You can't do this. And you'd be like, no, I'm safe within my own body and I can do this because I've proven it, or I am doing this. And then you wait for the next response. Yeah, I get that, but, in another response. And then you take that response and you respond to it again until eventually you get a yes from your subconscious. And now you have your real affirmation, one that you've kind of developed through this conversation back and forth. That's what I find is really impactful. And I call it upgraded affirmations as part of my course as well.
So it's not really something where you say, well, breathwork is actually suitable for that, or it's not like the first thing that comes in mind. It's more like,
breath work itself, I would say there are plenty of different styles of breathe. You can do any kind of aware, like mindfulness approach where you're just listening to your breath while kind of speaking to yourself.
I see. Yeah. What additional resources or support would you recommend, our listeners to know more about, breathwork in the context of anxiety based on what you've read, what you've learned? Any resources that come to mind?
Pretty much everything that we've kind of talked about is the resource. It is kind of the basis of what so my experience is I grew up with just chronic, brutal anxiety, panic attacks and that kind of thing all the way up till, 30, and I just, even when I was kind of still, I was getting into the breath and that kind of stuff was still there. And I was like, why isn't this working? And so that's where I've developed these are the tools that I use. But if I were to say like other kind of helpful pieces is stuff like the Oxa or an app I use. It's called Stamina. It's a free diving app that you can plug in and customize your own tables. I use that with my clients so that they can have custom based on their outcomes. I can create a program within there. Those are the kind of tools that I use, and anything that can kind of help you get back to your body. So I think any of that kind of stuff is great as a tool, but not to be relied on. So any kind of device as a tool, the watches that give you your heart rate and all that stuff, or the Aura, those are great to understand yourself, but then you shouldn't be relying on them to tell you how you feel. You should be like, I always say, if you have a whoop or an aura or anything like that, use it until you can wake up and know your numbers. Like you should be trying to guess it every day. It's like, all right, assess how I feel today. I feel a little bit, I feel tired. I bet you my reading is this. And then go to it and be like, all right, I'm getting close.
Yeah. So understanding your body and yourself better through the help of technology in a way. Yeah. No, awesome. I think we'll put all the links in the show notes. The last question for you, Ryan, because I'm looking at the time and we're already running a bit of time. If we move away from the topic of anxiety and go more into general, like, is there like one breathing practice that you would recommend everyone to adopt that you're doing on a daily basis? Can be anything.
I love the metrics and the competitive parts of it. Making breathwork competitive is silly, I know, but the breath hold techniques are really just like, I enjoy them, and I feel like most people can benefit from them. If you want to do obviously don't want to do an 8-minute breath hold, but it's not so good after a few minutes. But the build up and the structure of that is just, you're getting conscious breathing. It is diaphragmatic. It's deep. You're in a sympathetic state. Obviously, when you hold, that will switch. But that also helps you with stress regulation and understanding that, like, all right, I can bring myself back. I can talk myself out of the biggest part in a breath hold is that discomfort. And the moment where you can tell yourself, like, it's so uncomfortable, you're ready to breathe, and you go, no, I'm safe and I have plenty of oxygen. This is just a trigger that's alerting me. I can retain this. And then you feel the ease come down and you feel that tension go away momentarily. But the fact that you can see that you can control it is so powerful to everybody. So I love, like, CO2 tables or any kind of those breathing techniques where there are longer holds that are kind of at your sub-max level. I feel like those are very powerful for everybody.
That's super interesting. And definitely the topic of like freediving, that's really something we have also in mind for like future episodes. So we'll see if it comes up. But I think there's a lot to learn in that space. And that's quite fascinating. I mean, it's quite a unique power that you can actually, I don't know, like when you look at what these guys do, they can hold their breath for like so long, and then they dive like so deep, they resist against like such heavy pressures. It's very impressive.
Imagine feeling that and being like, you're 100 feet below and you're just looking up and be like, if I wanted to breathe, I could not, so it's that ability. Freediving is what got me into this whole thing. 9 years ago, I did a freediving certification, and I always tried to meditate. I always tried to try to be mindful, and I'm like, it was impossible. I was like, this is so hard. I was stressed out doing meditation. Yeah. So I remember that moment when I was in that freediving class and I was in the water, and I just totally everything went still, and I held my breath for 3 minutes from a 30-second breath hold, So yeah, I think those practices are in my heart, and I really enjoy those, and I love teaching them to people.
Super. Thank you so much, Ryan. I think it was super interesting. You explained us, your approach for the assessment, and I really liked it. It's also something I think that Dave told us, in terms of the holistic approach. It's not like you just look at how people breathe, but it's like the whole way, their way of living, that's also related to the modern world we were talking at the beginning. And super useful, and I'm sure listeners will appreciate. So thank you for your time.
Exactly.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to our conversation with Ryan Carroll, where we discuss breathing tools to address anxiety and find inner peace. To learn more about and explore the resources that Ryan mentioned, check out the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode of the Oxa podcast, subscribe on YouTube or your preferred listening platform, and give us feedback via email using podcast@oxalife.com or in the comment section. Feel free to also share topic suggestions for the next episodes, as well as guest recommendations. If you know someone who would benefit from today's conversation, please share the episode with this person. As an additional way to support the show, you can leave us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It helps us a lot bringing the podcast forward. Thank you again for listening to today's episode and for your interest in the science of breathing.